This is you, standing in a trench that smells like death, piss, and promethium fuel. You're clutching a laser gun. That's a laser rifle the Imperium mass produces like McDonald's makes burgers, except this burger might explode in your hands. You've got maybe 15 hours of combat left before something out there turns you into a red mist. And the worst part, you're one of the lucky ones. You got issued actual boots. Let's rewind. How did you end up here holding the galactic equivalent of a flashlight against enemies that can rip tanks apart? You were born on a Hive world. That's a planet-sized city where billions are stacked on top of each other like sardines in a can. You grew up in the mid-Hive, not the absolute bottom where mutants eat each other, but not the top where nobles sip wine and pretend the other 99% don't exist. Your parents worked 16-hour shifts in a corpse starch factory. That's right, corpse starch. The Imperium recycles dead bodies into food bars because apparently letting protein go to waste is heresy. Your childhood? 12 years of getting taught 3 things. How to read basic Gothic script, how to pray to the God Emperor, and how to operate industrial machinery without losing fingers. That was the entire curriculum. Math, science, history, critical thinking. Nah, those are for nobles and tech priests. You just needed to know enough to work until you died. Then you turned 18. The tithe came. See, every imperial world owes the Imperium a cut of its resources. Some worlds pay in food, others pay in weapons or raw materials. Your world, it pays in people. Specifically soldiers. Every year, the Departamento Munitorum, the military logistics department that runs the Imperial Guard, shows up with quotas. They need 10 million fresh troops from your planet. And they don't care who. The selection process was a joke. They lined up everyone in your district, thousands of people, and just pointed. Completely random. The guy next to you, he was a factory foreman, 45 years old, with a wife and 3 kids. He got skipped. You, 18 years old, no family, average build, boom. Tagged, congratulations, you just got drafted into the largest military force in human history. They shaved your head, gave you a serial number that's longer than most people's names, and threw you on a transport ship with 10,000 other recruits. The ship was a rusted hulk that creaked like it was held together with prayers and duct tape. You spent 3 months in transit sleeping in a hammock stacked 4 levels high. The smell was so bad you stopped noticing it after week 2. Training lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks! You learned to march in formation, shoot straightish, dig trenches, follow orders, and die for the Emperor without complaint. That's it. They showed you how to field strip your laser gun, taught you that the power pack has 100 shots before it needs recharging, and drilled into your skull that running from the enemy means a commissar shoots you in the back. The commissar is an officer whose entire job is killing cowards and maintaining morale through fear. They dress in black, wear skull insignias, and execute soldiers to prove a point. After 6 weeks, they handed you your gear. 1 laser gun. Sounds impressive until you realize the Imperium calls it a flashlight, because against most enemies, it barely scratches them. Sure, it'll kill an orc if you hit it enough times, but orcs are 7-foot tall muscle monsters who think getting shot is funny. Your laser gun will absolutely wreck unarmored humans though. Too bad you're not fighting humans. 1 flak vest. It's basically thick cardboard with metal plates. Stops shrapnel and stub rounds. Won't stop a chainsword, a bolter shell, a plasma blast, or anything actually dangerous. But hey, it's better than nothing. 1 combat knife. For when you run out of ammo and need to charge a Tyranid warrior, spoiler alert, that knife won't help. 1 helmet. Steel, dented, probably belonged to 3 dead guys before you. 1 rucksack containing a sleeping bag, a mess kit, a water canteen, a week's worth of ration bars, a field manual you can't fully read, and a copy of the Imperial Infantryman's Uplifting Primer. That's a propaganda book that lies about everything. It claims laser guns are powerful, enemies are cowardly, and the guard always wins. It's fiction marketed as fact. 1 dog tag with your name, number, blood type, and homeworld, so they can identify your body. if there's enough left to identify. Total value of your equipment, about 100 throne gelt. That's one of the Imperial currency. For reference, a decent bottle of wine costs 50 gelt. You're worth 2 bottles of wine to the Imperium. They loaded your regiment onto another transport, a ship even more decrepit than the last one. This time, you weren't alone. Your regiment, the 183rd Hive Guard, consisted of 10,000 soldiers from your world. You bunked with guys from your city. You learned their names. Jack, a former ganger. Mira, who worked in a textile factory. Rothan, who was supposed to get married next month. You joked, played cards with counterfeit coins, and pretended you weren't heading to a war zone. The ship traveled through the warp. That's an alternate dimension where physics is drunk and demons exist. Ships use a psychic barrier called a Geller field to keep demons out. When it works, you're fine. When it doesn't, everyone dies screaming. You spent 2 months in transit hoping the field wouldn't fail. Every night you heard scratching sounds in the walls. The veteran soldiers said it was just the ship settling. You knew better. You were traveling through hell, and hell was watching you back. Then you arrive. The planet's name is Graxis 4, a former agricultural world conquered by orcs 3 years ago. Your regiment's job? Take it back. The Departmentum Unitorum assigned 50 regiments to this operation that's roughly 500,000 soldiers. Sounds like overkill, until you realize orcs reproduce by releasing spores when they die, and this planet has been infested for 3 years. Conservative estimates put the orc population at 10 million. You're outnumbered 20 to 1. The landing was hell. Your transport got hit by orc anti-aircraft fire before it even touched down. The ship crash landed in a field that used to grow wheat. Now it grows craters and corpses. You stumbled out, disoriented, ears ringing from the impact. Half your squad didn't make it out. The transport's rear ramp jammed, trapping 50 soldiers inside as the fuel cells ignited. You heard them screaming for 30 seconds before the fire consumed them. Your sergeant, a grizzled veteran with a bionic eye and 3 service studs in his forehead. Those are metal pins you earn for every 15 years of service. Started barking orders. Form up! Find cover! Return fire! You followed because you didn't know what else to do. The first orc you saw, it was 50 meters away. It was massive. 8 feet tall, built like a tank made of muscle and green skin. It wore scrap metal armor welded together and carried a gun the size of your torso. The gun was called a Shuda because orcs aren't creative, and it fired large caliber rounds in full auto. Accuracy wasn't the point. Volume was. It saw you and charged. You raised your laser gun, aimed like they taught you, and pulled the trigger. The last bolt hit the orc in the chest. It barely noticed. You fired again and again. 5 shots center mass, and the orc laughed, and kept charging. By the time you'd fired 15 shots, it was 20 meters away. Then your sergeant's plasma gun turned it into slag. The sergeant didn't congratulate you. He just reloaded and moved on. You learned something important that day. You're not a soldier. You're ammunition. The Imperium strategy isn't skill or tactics. It's throwing enough bodies at the problem until it goes away. Your regiment dug in at a defensive position designated Hill 337. It wasn't much of a hill, more like a mound of rubble from a bombed out settlement. You spent 6 hours digging a trench with a collapsible shovel. The dirt was red and smelled like chemicals, probably runoff from the orc settlements. By nightfall, you'd created a crude trench network connecting 40 soldiers. The commissar assigned to your company walked the line. He was tall, wore a long black coat, and carried a bolt pistol, a gun that fires explosive rounds. He stopped in front of your trench and stared at you. Didn't say anything, just stared. Then he moved on. You later learned he was making mental notes of who looked weak. If the line broke, he'd start shooting from the back. Night fell, and that's when you learned orcs don't sleep much. They attacked at 2 a.m. You heard them before you saw them. A sound like a stampede mixed with a heavy metal concert. Orcs love noise. Their whole culture revolves around fighting, and the bigger and louder you are, the more respect you get. They charge screaming war cries, firing wildly and waving crude axes. Your sergeant screamed, "Fire at will!" And you did. You fired until your power pack overheated, then you swapped in a fresh one and kept firing. The last bolts lit up the night like a laser light show, but orcs are tough. For everyone you killed, 3 more kept coming. They hit the trench line at 2:17 a.m. You know because you checked your chrono right before an orc vaulted into your trench. It was smaller than the first one, only 7 feet tall, but it carried a choppa, a giant serrated blade. It swung at Mira, the textile worker. The blade cut through her flak vest like paper. She dropped. You stabbed it with your combat knife. The blade punched through its neck. The orc gurgled, grabbed you, and tried to headbutt you before collapsing. Its blood was thick and smelled like oil. You didn't have time to process it. 2 more orcs jumped in. Jack shot one point blank with his laser gun. The other grabbed Rothan and snapped his neck like a twig. Then your sergeant showed up with a chainsword, a blade with motorized teeth, and carved through both orcs like butter. The fight lasted 30 minutes. When it was over, your trench held 15 soldiers. You started with 40. Mira was dead. Rothan was dead. Jack was alive but missing his left hand. An orc bit it off. The medici, a field medic, cauterized the stump with a last pistol and gave Jack a shot of painkillers. Jack went into shock and died an hour later from blood loss. And that was your first engagement. You'd been on the planet for 8 hours. You'd been in combat for 30 minutes. Your life expectancy dropped to 14.5 hours. The next day, your company received orders to advance. The orcs were regrouping 5 kilometers east. Command wanted you to push them back before they organized another assault. You marched through bombed-out farmland, past burnt-out vehicles, and over fields littered with corpses. Some were orcs, most were guardsmen from regiments that landed yesterday. You passed a Lehman Russ battle tank, the Imperium standard tank. It was flipped upside down, the turret torn off. Something big did that. Probably an orc battle wagon or a Def Dread. You didn't want to think about what could flip a 60-ton tank. At noon, you reached the staging area. Your regiment linked up with 3 others. A colonel you'd never seen gave a speech from atop a Chimera transport. He talked about duty, honor, and the Emperor's divine will. He promised victory. He promised glory. He didn't promise survival. The advance began at 1300 hours. Your regiment formed the center line. Armored support rolled ahead. Lehman Russ tanks and Chimera APCs. Artillery batteries, basilisks, stationed 10 kilometers behind the line, started shelling the orc positions. The ground shook with each impact. You watched the horizon light up with explosions. For 15 minutes, it looked like you might win. Then the orcs hit back. They had their own artillery, massive cannons cobbled together from scrap metal. They weren't accurate, but they didn't need to be. The shells were the size of small cars. When one landed near your squad, the shockwave knocked you off your feet. Your ears bled. You couldn't hear anything except a high-pitched ringing. A guardsman named Vex, who you'd shared rations with that morning, was 10 meters closer to the impact. The shockwave liquefied his insides. He looked intact from the outside, but was dead before he hit the ground. Your sergeant pulled you up and pushed you forward. The advance continued. You marched into a meat grinder. The orc position was a fortress made from wrecked Imperial vehicles, scrap metal, and corpses. They built it in days. Orcs are incredible engineers when motivated by violence. From the fortress, hundreds of orcs fired shootas, slogas, and big shootas. Bullets the size of your thumb filled the air like rain. You dove behind a crater for cover. 3 other guardsmen joined you. None of them were from your original squad. You didn't know their names. One took a round through the helmet 5 seconds later. The helmet didn't stop it. His head exploded like a watermelon. Your orders were simple. Advance until you reach the fortress or die trying. The commissar shot a guardsman 20 meters to your left for hesitating. The message was clear. Death from the enemy is probable. Death from retreat is guaranteed. You ran. You sprinted across open ground while bullets zipped past. A chimera exploded to your right. the ammo cooking off and turning it into a fireball. You saw a guardsman on fire, rolling on the ground, screaming. Nobody stopped to help. You made it to the next crater. 2 more guardsmen joined you. You reloaded, aimed, and fired at the fortress. Your last bolts hit nothing important. You were too far away and too scared to aim properly, but you fired anyway because stopping meant dying. A Lehman Russ tank rolled past, firing its battle cannon. The shell hit the fortress dead center, collapsing part of the wall. For a moment you felt hope. Then an orc rocket, a rocket launcher, hit the tank's side armor. The tank brewed up, the crew burning alive inside. You realize something. The Imperium strategy isn't about winning. It's about wearing the enemy down until they run out of bullets. And you're the bait. The charge continued for 2 hours. By 1500 hours, your regiment reached the fortress. What was left of it? 3,000 soldiers started the charge. Maybe 800 reached the walls. You climbed over rubble, stepped on corpses, both orc and human, and entered the fortress. The fighting became close quarters. No room for laser guns. You used your knife, a rock, your fists. You saw a guardsman beat an orc to death with his helmet. You saw an orc bite a guardsman's throat out. You stabbed an orc in the eye and watched it fall. Your sergeant took an orc chop to the chest. He died instantly, the bionic eye flickering out as his body went limp. You didn't have time to process it. You just kept moving. By 1600 hours, the fortress was secured. You stood among the ruins covered in blood, some yours, most not. Your hands shook uncontrollably. You'd been in sustained combat for 3 hours. Your life expectancy was now 11.5 hours. That night, you learned about the 15-hour statistic. The Departmento Munitorum, in their infinite wisdom, tracks casualty rates across all war zones. They've determined that the average Imperial Guardsman survives approximately 15 hours of active frontline combat before death or incapacitation, not 15 hours total service, 15 hours of actual fighting. Some soldiers live longer through sheer luck or cowardice. Most die faster. You'd been in combat for 3.5 hours. You had 11.5 hours left. Statistically. The next week was a blur. Your regiment pushed deeper into orc territory. Every day was the same. March, dig in, fight, survive, repeat. The faces around you kept changing. New replacements arrived from other regiments. You stopped learning names. What was the point? You learned to identify threats by sound, the whistle of incoming artillery, the roar of an orc warbike engine, the clicking sound orc storm boys, jetpack troops made when they flew overhead. You learned to sleep through gunfire. You learned to eat while standing in a trench full of mud, and worse. You learned that the Imperial Infantryman's uplifting primer was a comedy book because everything it said was a lie. On day 4, you encountered your first war boss. It was 12 feet tall, covered in armor made from tank plating, and carried a power claw, a mechanical claw that could tear through ceramite. It killed 20 guardsmen before a Lehman Russ executioner plasma blasted it to atoms. You were 30 meters away when it died. The shockwave knocked you flat. On day 6, your regiment linked up with a space marine from the Ultramarines chapter. He was 8 feet tall, wore blue power armor, and carried a bolter. He single-handedly killed 50 orcs in 5 minutes. You watched in awe. This is what the Emperor's finest look like. This is what you'd never be. Space Marines are genetically engineered super soldiers. You're just a guy with a laser pointer. The Space Marine didn't acknowledge you. You were beneath his notice. To him, you weren't a fellow soldier. You were a meat shield doing your job by dying so he didn't have to. On day 7, you fought in a ruined city. The orcs had turned it into a kill zone. Every window had a shooter. Every street had traps. Your company cleared it building by building. You kicked down a door and found 3 dead guardsmen nailed to the walls. The orcs did it as a joke. On day 8, you ran out of water. The supply lines got cut by orc raiders. You drank from a puddle that tasted like metal and chemicals. You got sick but kept fighting because stopping meant dying. On day 9, your regiment received reinforcements. Fresh troops from another world. They looked at the veterans, the 300 survivors from the original 10,000, with a mix of awe and fear. You remember being that naive. That was 9 days ago. It felt like a lifetime. On day 10, the orcs counterattacked. They came at dawn with everything. Trucks, battle wagons, death dreads, Stompus, and a goddamn Gargant, a walking fortress the size of a skyscraper. The Gargant had cannons for arms and fired shells that leveled city blocks. Your regiment held the line for 3 hours, then the line broke. The commissar started executing retreating soldiers. He shot 5 guardsmen before an orc shoot a bullet took his head off. Without the commissar's motivation, the retreat became a rout. You ran. Not because you were a coward, you were way past caring about bravery, but because staying meant certain death. You ran through streets littered with bodies, past burning vehicles, over rubble and ruin. Behind you, the Gargant's footsteps shook the earth. You reached a fallback position, a fortified bunker manned by a heavy weapons team. They had autocannons and last cannons. They told you to get inside and hold the line. You didn't have a choice. The orcs hit the bunker at noon. You fired your laser gun until the barrel overheated and the power pack died. You grabbed a fallen guardsman's weapon and kept firing. When that ran out, you threw grenades. When those ran out, you grabbed a laser gun bayonet, a blade attachment, and prepared for close combat. The orcs breached the bunker. You stabbed one through the throat. Another grabbed you and lifted you off the ground. Its breath smelled like rotten meat. It laughed as it prepared to crush your skull. Then a last cannon shot vaporized it. You fell, gasping, alive by sheer luck. The heavy weapons team held the bunker for another hour before reinforcements arrived. When it was over, you were one of 12 survivors from a garrison of 60. That was 13 hours of combat. You had 2 hours left. Statistically speaking, remember, the average survival time of a guardsman is 15 hours of combat. Day 11. You sat in a trench, too exhausted to move. Your laser gun was gone, lost in the bunker fight. Someone handed you a replacement. The power pack was at 30% charge. Your flak vest had 3 holes in it from near misses. Your helmet was cracked. Your hands were covered in cuts and burns. A new lieutenant came since the old one died on day 5. He gave your squad new orders. A strategic hill needed to be held. It was vital for artillery positioning. Losing it meant losing the sector. You marched to the hill. Your squad consisted of 20 guardsmen. None of them were from your original regiment. You were the only survivor from the 183rd Hive Guard. Everyone else was dead. You dug in at the hill and waited. Intelligence reported a major orc offensive coming at dawn. Your orders were to hold the hill no matter the cost. Air support was unavailable. Armor support was unavailable. Artillery support would arrive when possible. You were alone. That night, you wrote a letter you'd never send. You wrote it in the margins of your field manual. Using a piece of charcoal, you wrote to your parents even though they were probably dead. You told them you were sorry. Sorry for getting drafted. Sorry for not saying goodbye. Sorry for not being strong enough to survive. Yeah. You finished writing and looked at the stars. Somewhere up there, trillions of humans lived on millions of worlds. Most of them would never know your name. Most of them would never know a war was being fought here. You were dying for an Imperium that didn't know you existed. Dawn came. The orcs attacked with everything. Thousands of them. Supported by battle wagons and death dreads. Your squad opened fire. Last bolts lit up the morning like fireworks. You killed orcs. Dozens of them. But there were always more. The first guardsman died at 06:15. Orcs shoot a fire, cut him in half. the second died at 0620, the third at 0625. By 0700, your squad was down to 10 soldiers. By 0735, at 0745, you were alone. You stood in the trench, surrounded by corpses, firing your laser gun at the endless green tide. Your power pack was almost dead. You had one grenade left. The hill was lost. You knew it. The orcs knew it. But you kept firing because that's what guardsmen do. You keep fighting until you can't. An orc war boss climbed the hill. It was massive, scarred, and carrying a power claw still dripping with blood. It saw you, grinned, and charged. You pulled the pin on your last grenade and threw it. The orc batted it away like a toy. The grenade exploded harmlessly in the air. You raised your laser gun and pulled the trigger. Nothing. The power pack was dead. The orc laughed. You dropped the laser gun and drew your combat knife. It was a stupid gesture. The knife was 6 inches long. The orc was 12 feet tall, but you'd die standing, weapon in hand, because that's all you had left. The orc swung its power claw, and that's where your story ends. 15 hours and 13 minutes of combat time. You lasted longer than average. Barely. Your body will be left on that hill. The orcs will loot your equipment and leave your corpse to rot. In 3 weeks, another regiment will take the hill back. They'll bury you in a mass grave with 10,000 other guardsmen. Your name will be recorded in a casualty report filed by a clerk 50 light years away. Your parents will never receive notification. Your world will never know you died. But here's the thing, you're not special. This happens every day. Millions of guardsmen die just like you across thousands of war zones. The Imperium doesn't care. Your death bought maybe 10 minutes of time. Maybe it delayed the orc advance long enough for artillery to set up. Maybe your sacrifice saved, 50 soldiers down the line. Or maybe it didn't matter at all. Because in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there is only war. And you were just another casualty in a war that will never end. The Imperium will draft another 1,000,000 soldiers to replace you. They'll ship them to another war zone. They'll die in another 15 hours. And the machine keeps grinding. That's the life of an average guardsman. Not glory, not honor. Just 15 hours of terror followed by an unmarked grave and a statistic. Welcome to the Imperial Guard. You're already dead. You just don't know it yet.